This may come as a surprise to some of you, but I wasn't a very good student. By that, I don't mean that I got bad grades. I was a B and C student who didn't really try at anything and just kind of floated my way through school. What I mean by being a bad student is that I was a teacher's worst nightmare. I would play pranks on teachers, talk during class, sleep, not pay attention. I even lit my pants leg on fire once in the middle of class with a lighter out of boredom. I spent a lot of time in detention and in school suspension because I generally disliked school all around. One of my many ways of getting around doing any actual schoolwork at school was to carry a USB drive with me everywhere I went. Sadly, that jump drive passed away some time ago. It was a really cheap brand and was awful by every standard, but that drive isn't what mattered. What was on it is what did. I had that thing loaded out with emulation software and games. Anytime I got my hands on a computer at school, I would boot up whatever game I wanted to play and block out whatever the teacher was saying. This is actually how I ever found time to play Chrono Trigger, one of my favorite games ever. I use that trick in every class, every chance I get. I probably played over 1,000 hours of games in the middle of class, and I'd say over 500 of those hours went to Dwarf Fortress. You might have heard of Dwarf Fortress. Famous for being made by a small team and for being hard as nails to decipher without graphical packs, Dwarf Fortress looks the same way that it plays, like an absolute undertaking. The entire game is played with a keyboard, and there is nothing that you can do besides memorize the key bindings that the game requires. There is a handy menu, but it's about as easy to read as your best friend's suicide note. What's this? No. No! Hey! Oh. Only through hours of playing have I gotten to the point where I can finally play the game with any sense of normalcy. Because of the way that Dwarf Fortress is controlled, watching somebody play it looks like someone with cerebral palsy trying to type a love letter. So how do we make it easier? Well, our first step is to download the newest version of Dwarf Fortress. You can do this for absolutely free at the 12-Bay website, and soon you'll be able to download it on Steam. Once you've gotten the game, to make it a little bit more playable, you'll need to download a graphical pack. You can find these on the Dwarf Fortress wiki. There are several of these, so just download whichever one looks the most appealing to you. I'll link that page from the wiki in the description, but don't worry, we'll be using the wiki a lot anyways. Some of these graphical mods will come with the game pre-installed with them, so you don't have to worry about the first step. Great, so now we have Dwarf Fortress and it doesn't look like somebody threw up alphabet soup. What's next? Well, we can finally boot up the game. This is where you'll be greeted with the only cutscene that the game has to offer. I love this cutscene. It's a classic. There have been several artist renditions of it that you can find on YouTube. You should watch those. They're cool. It reminds me of my days mining for Dogecoin. Remember Dogecoin? No? Okay. Now to play Dwarf Fortress. But wait, yet again, we can't actually play the game yet. First, we have to create the world that the game will take place in. If you have the processing power necessary, this shouldn't take too long, but if you're running Dwarf Fortress on a TI-86 graphing calculator with a superiority complex, you might as well go ahead and fix something to eat while you wait. This is going to take longer than getting your parents to be proud of you. For your first time, no matter your machine, I recommend going with a small world with a short history and leaving everything else at its default. This should mitigate the time that it takes to create the world. Finally, once your world is complete, you can actually play Dwarf Fortress. You'll notice that you have 3 modes that you can choose from: Dwarf Fortress, Adventurer, and Legends. Dwarf Fortress is what most people actually spend their time playing, but Adventure mode can be pretty fun too. In Adventure mode, you strike out as a lone adventurer in the world you've created. If you've never played Dwarf Fortress before, this mode will be absolutely impossible, and you'll most likely die immediately. Legends is a mode for viewing the history of the world you've created. By default, much of the history of the world will be unexplored and therefore unavailable in Legends mode. By playing either Dwarf Fortress or Adventurer mode, you can delve deep into the tomes of history your worlds hold and uncover the dark truths that might be lurking within. As I said though, most people spend their time playing Dwarf Fortress mode. Once you select Dwarf Fortress mode, you'll be asked to choose a fortress location. This is one of the biggest hurdles for anyone playing Dwarf Fortress for the first time, so I'm going to make this very clear. Use the search function. If you don't use the search function and look for specific areas that meet your needs, you'll be combing the entire planet. Finding a hospitable fortress location will be harder than finding my dignity. So we have a few things here that we want to make sure of. We want to make sure that the temperature is mild, that the surrounding areas aren't too evil, and that there is no aquifer in the ground. You might want to make sure that there are some trees and vegetation around as well, but if you want to suffer, I'm not going to stop you. Once we've found our spot, just click E to embark and we'll be asked to prepare for our journey. If you've ever played Oregon Trail, this is like that, but on a post-grad level. I'm not going to tell you exactly how to prepare for your journey, but I'll give a few tips. First off, you'll want to make sure that you have food, drinks, and a mining pick, and probably an animal or two before you set out on your way. As far as skills, you can do whatever you want as long as you make sure that you have at least one dwarf who's a decent miner and one who is an appraiser. This will save you a lot of headache in the game. Without an appraiser, you can't trade, and having a miner at the beginning helps you build your fortress faster. Now you're finally ready to embark. You have arrived. After a journey from the mountain homes into the forbidding wilderness beyond, your harsh trek has finally ended. Your party of 7 is to make an outpost for the glory of Azrathmobil. There are almost no supplies left, but with stout labor comes sustenance. Whether by bolt, plow, or hook provide for your dwarves. You were expecting a supply caravan just before winter entombs you, but it is spring now. Enough time to delve secure lodgings, ere the grizzly bears get hungry. A new chapter of dwarven history begins, here at this place, Ducimimal. Work to sense. Strike the earth. Well, this is it. We're here. The Promised Land. The perfect dwarven paradise foretold in legends. Sung many a cold winter night over a crackling hearth. A lingering hope that kept us going when the trek seemed insurmountable. Welcome to your new home. It's a field. This is where the actual playing of the game comes in. Now you're tasked with surviving through the winter and making your fortress appealing enough to pull in migrants from other outposts. Just go ahead and pull up the wiki, you'll need it. My advice for how to play the game for the first time is go ahead and dig into a mountain and set a meeting place to work as a large living space. Then start mining out large hallways with small rooms on either side of it to create a dorm. This way your dwarves will have some place to sleep. Start planting more seeds inside your cave than my dad did inside my sister's, and you'll probably make it through your first year. Start crafting as much stuff as you can from the rocks that you'll no doubt have all over your fortress floors, and wait for the trade caravan to come through. Then pray to Moradin that they have whatever you need. If you can't tell by now, Dwarf Fortress isn't a game about winning. It's a game about building. There is no endgame win condition outside of getting one of your dwarves named King, and even then you can still completely continue to play the game as normal. Nope. The fun of Dwarf Fortress, as explained by its fan-base motto, is losing is fun. No matter how hard you try or how good you are at Dwarf Fortress, eventually your entire fortress will be wiped out by something. 99% of the time, this will completely be your fault, and it will be hilarious. Dwarf Fortress's aesthetic by default looks like the wall of text from The Matrix. You'll stop seeing the @ symbol and eventually see the lady wearing the red dress. This is intentional, as the developers of Dwarf Fortress are more concerned by the content of the game itself than the visuals. Basically, the entire game is also processing the entire world all at once as well, like the entire time. If you just go and look and see what's happening in another city, then that just gets updated every second, and if you want to see what a king is doing in another city, then you can just look at that at every second, and it's constantly updating that. But if you need graphics to get off, some absolutely vile modders have made mods for 3D Fortress visualization. There are always new graphics packs and ways being developed to play Dwarf Fortress by its massive fanbase. Eventually, in the far-off year of 2000X, Dwarf Fortress will have full VR support, mark my words. I myself use the Mayday pack when I play. I find the look appealing and not visually overbearing like some of the more heavy mods. I still like my game to look like DOS, but with just a little bit more color depth and without the bleeps and bloops of that era. As a matter of fact, I don't really like the use of the sound in Dwarf Fortress at all. The only in-game sound comes from the game's background music, which is a pleasing flamenco guitar picking. The track is beautiful and calming, but overall unnecessary. You can completely turn the audio off in the menu, and that's generally what I do as well. That way you can play whatever you feel like fits the mood. This is a big draw for me. I like playing games where I can put on whatever audio I want or watch a movie while I'm playing. It's an even bigger bonus if I can just play the game with one hand. That way I can do, you know, other things. Like jack off! Can't really play Dwarf Fortress with one hand, though, unless you're one of those disgusting savages that types using one hand. Until recently, the game didn't even have any mouse support, so the entire game was played with a keyboard. Not only that, Dwarf Fortress utilizes almost all the keys into its design and interface. While playing, you can bring up the controls menu by pressing tab. This will help tremendously for new players, and even for veterans who are coming back after a while. Eventually, Dwarf Fortress becomes second nature. The keystrokes almost perform themselves, and you don't even have to think about how to do anything. Starting out, it can kind of feel like deciphering an ancient language, but eventually it just falls into place and something just clicks in your head. Then playing the game kind of looks like this. As far as the control of the mouse, I don't even use what's been added. I can still do everything faster with the keyboard, and I'm not sure what adding mouse control into the game really did for the product. You would think that it would be some way to make it more player-friendly, but if anything, the mouse takes controlling the game and makes it more confusing, as it only works with like a handful of menus, like the sound menu and nothing else. The average Dwarf Fortress veteran pictured here would sooner pawn off their mouse for an extra megabyte of RAM than actually try to use it. On top of that, some of the keyboard shortcuts the game won't even tell you. They can be found in the help menu of the game, stuff like holding shift and pressing H or K to make the grid that you're creating increase by 5 squares instead of 1, stuff like that. These quality of life shortcuts aren't necessary to play the game, but some will really cut down on time. I recommend reading up on them once you have a good grasp on the game. Most of them blend into one another, and if you learn 1 or 2, then you'll have learned like 10. Speaking of which, you don't really get to control your dwarves individually, like in RimWorld. What you'll do for the most part is control what they can and can't do, and then set tasks around the general area. You know, like prison, with slightly less gang violence. Once the dwarves find out that you've asked them to make 10 beds, one of the good-for-nothing drunks will get right on that, assuming that there's a bed cobbler, of course. The biggest chore that the game presents the player with is the military armor and weapon system. This thing is more difficult to grasp than why the fuck kids like the taste of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. But by God is my fucking witness, I will have my answer in this life or the next. First, you have to create a military unit. Then assign dwarves to that military unit. Then assign armor and weapons to the unit. Then tell that unit what to do. This is where the newer games like RimWorld have the advantage. Easily being able to draft characters is the best innovation of this genre since Dwarf Fortress Rule 34. Overall, Dwarf Fortress is a hassle to control, and this is probably the steepest learning curve. I can't help you there, you'll just have to play the game yourself and get used to it over time. It's like a rite of passage for every Dwarf Fortress player to overcome. Once it's complete, the community is ready to welcome you as its new brother. When that switch in your brain flips, you go from being a virgin gamer to a Chad micromanager. After you've had your fill with Dwarf Fortress mode, you should check out Adventure mode, and maybe some of the mods that come with it. Like I've said before, the community for Dwarf Fortress is massive. If you can think of an improvement for the game, there is probably a mod for it. Want to rip out the teeth of your enemies and create jewelry from them instead of make toys in Santa's workshop? There's a mod for that. Want to give your dwarves black lung from working in the coal mines? There's a mod for that. Do you want to finally give yourself over to the sentient fungus waifu you've been dreaming of growing in your garden? There too is a mod for that. I could spend hours just describing to you the stories that this game and I have created together. Once the map my fortress was built on got invaded by ostriches, I'm talking about a lot of ostriches, over 300 ostriches. They were a pest, so I got one of my soldiers to start cleaning them out. By the end of the ostrich genocide, my dwarf had made a name for himself as the most bloodthirsty and ravenous bastard in all the land. Whenever I got invaded, he would take out entire battalions of goblins and elves by himself. He was a walking blender with an axe, and nothing stood in his way. He died a true warrior's death, defending his home from an ancient octopus minotaur chimera beast. His family and friends built him a massive underground tomb filled with riches that sported one long tube that pierced all the way to the surface. From then on, whenever we took prisoners of war, we would sacrifice them to him, dropping them down the tube several hundred feet until they finally met their bloody end, landing on a metal statue of his visage. After that, people stopped coming by the fort. For, completely unrelated reasons, I'm sure. Years later, while playing adventure mode, my character got stung by a scorpion in the desert, and the poison meant certain death. So, I took up and completed my final quest, flinging myself into the pit to appease the dwarven god of blood. I can't recommend Dwarf Fortress enough. It's always been there for me. It's something that I can always play, and I will always play until the day that I die. Download it, play it now. Years from now, you'll be sorry that you didn't. Give your life over to Armok, the god of blood, and finally achieve full no-life status in your basement, role-playing as the ultimate basement dwellers. Dwarf Fortress is a perfect score. 10 out of 10, masterpiece. If you think otherwise, you're probably a zoomer. To all my dwarven brethren out there, you're welcome at my fortress anytime. Please do all the call to action stuff that I always ask for at the end of these videos, like comment and subscribe, share, whatever else you think will help improve the channel. Thank you all for watching. Each and every one of you is very, very special to me. I love you.